Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and I have made a hopefully triumphant return with batch of brand new videos. And we will be starting off these videos with Academy's 1/72nd scale F-35A. This is boxed as the 7 Air Force packaging, and I like to think that it is a play on the White Stripes song 7 Nation Army. But basically you get decals for aircraft from 7 different nations that use the F-35A. And you'll also notice on this decal sheet here that it actually comes with all of the RAM material as well. So even though, as far as I understand, the F-35A doesn't actually use separate colored RAM material anymore like it did before, so this will be kind of a backdated F-35A. But I did choose to utilize the decal paint scheme from Hill Air Force Base. And the reason I did that is because I live about an hour away from Hill Air Force Base. And Hill Air Force Base is the home of the U.S. Air Force's F-35 demo team, which I got to watch just last month at the Warriors over the Wasatch Air Show. So this is kind of a home base build for me, so I was pretty excited to get this going. And pretty much like every other aircraft model out there, construction starts in the cockpit. The ejection seat is actually quite detailed, consisting of multiple parts, and but the actual cockpit itself is rather simple and plain. But as I understand it, that's actually kind of how the real thing is. It's not like, you know, the old Cold War era fighter aircraft that were just full of dials and switches and stuff. You know, everything's computerized and on touch screens and whatnot. So quite simple. What I wanted to do, though, was to do the harnesses for the ejection seat, since I was planning on having the canopy open. And so here I'm just cutting some small strips of masking tape that I will use for the actual belts. And if you've watched my video on how to do seat belts, I pretty much follow that same idea. The only thing I didn't do on this was detail up like the buckles and the latches and things like that. I was really just kind of going for the representation that there are harnesses and belts here. So I didn't really go too all out on the detail on this. I really kind of wanted to keep this build out of the box as much as I could. So you won't see much detailing in this build. And I would, however, like to revisit this build at some point to actually do a really detailed build. I think there's a lot of room for detail in this kit. There were a few areas that I was a little disappointed that it was kind of lacking in some detail. So definitely, the kit is definitely a good starting point for a super detailed project. I know there are other manufacturers out there that do this kit as well, so it'd be interesting to compare to see how it stacks up to those other kits. But for the most part, I was pretty pleased with the kit and what the kit had to offer. I think you do get a lot of bang for your buck with this kit in terms of obviously the decal options, all the RAM material provided as decals, the fact that you get 7 different liveries to choose from many different nations. There's British and I believe Korean, South Korean. I mean, just there's quite a few, and it was pretty. Plus, you get weapon loadout. You get open or closed, weapon bays and landing gear bays. So you have the option of doing it fully in flight without any modification, which is always something that I'm a big fan of. For 2 reasons. One, I just, if you've watched me enough, you'll know that I'm a fan of options when it comes to kits. But also, it allows you to use, like, for example, when painting the main body, which you'll see later on, where I had painted up the wheel wells ahead of time to get them installed into the fuselage, I could use the closed landing gear door hatches and the closed weapon bay door hatches to mask off the parts that I had already painted. And so that kind of thing that's always a good bonus in my book. So here I'm just pre-painting a lot of the parts, or pre-priming, I should say. This I'm just using the Vallejo black primer. I knew I wouldn't be really doing any masking on this, so I wasn't worried about any liftoff or anything like that from the primer. So I do like the primer. I feel like it goes on really well. It gives a nice, good satin coat. I've just had problems with it lifting if I ever have to do any masking on it. So pretty much I relegate the Vallejo primer now to just doing things like interior pieces, or if I know that I will not be doing any masking, then that's usually when I will use it. So here I'm just painting like all the interior weapon bay doors, landing gear doors white, just using that MIG flat white. And with MIG's white, I've found that you really kind of have to thin it and spray it in multiple thin coats, but it will build up a really nice coverage and give you a good solid color. So it does take a little bit more work than like Tamiya's flat white, for example, but I like it, and I think it gives good results in the end, just after a few light coats. So here you can see I'm painting up the weapon bays, painting down the engine exhaust. The actual engine exhaust itself was actually really well detailed, and I was quite surprised with how detailed that was. A lot of good detail you could pick out there. Here I'm just picking out some of the cockpit paint or cockpit colors with brush painting. I figured it wasn't worth the effort to try and mask it all and airbrush it, and mainly just because with the seat and the control console in there, you really wouldn't see much of it anyways, so I wasn't too concerned with how it was going to look. And then just giving the ejection seat a good dry brush to kind of pick out some of those raised details, and doing that as well in the cockpit, just to kind of give some visual interest. When I'm working in 1/72nd scale, I definitely like to do this just to kind of help highlight details, even though it's not necessarily realistic. I guess you could call it an artistic choice. So that's what I like to do. Here I'm just picking out some details on the seat in some light gray colors. There really is kind of a monochromatic look to the inside of the F-35 cockpit, at least from what few pictures I've been able to see. Not a lot of color in there, so take it for what it is. All right, so with all the interior stuff painted, I could gloss coat it now and prepare it for a little bit of weathering and some washes. And I wasn't going to go super dirty with this, mainly just because these are brand new aircraft and they're usually kept in really good condition. So just a quick panel wash with my ever-present dark brown wash for green vehicles by MIG. And I'm going to be sad if they ever stop producing this wash, because it really is my favorite wash. But once it's dry, and you've seen this in my other videos, but once it dries, I wipe it away with a cotton bud here. So I really, again, like I said, I really wasn't going dirty. I just really wanted to kind of define and provide contrast for a lot of the raised detail that's on the interior components. There actually is quite a lot of detail. If you look here in the weapons bay, there's a lot of detail in there, and really it wouldn't take much more to really super detail it. Mainly just adding cables and pipes and conduits in there. That's really all it would take to really make that area pop. So all of the control stuff was provided by Decal. Obviously, it's a flat screen, it's a touch screen, so really couldn't. I mean, I guess you could try and hand paint that, but that'd be hard. So once all of the wash was dry and removed, and just everything got a flat coat, and I could start assembling everything. So the F-35 has a reclined seat similar to the F-16, where it's leaning back a little bit more than traditional fighter ejection seats, and but I mean, once it's all together, it's rather convincing. I think it looks the part, looks good. One of the nice things about this Academy kit is, as you can see, there very positive location points for all the major components. I really appreciate that. That makes it easier. One quick note on the intake trunks. They are white on the actual aircraft, and I really tried to, I had to scratch my head to figure out how I was going to mask those. And so what I ended up deciding that I would do is just pre-mask them, install them, and then hope that I could get the masking tape out once the whole build was done. And I was really kind of gambling here that this would work. One area of disappointment is there's no first stage compressor detail. And not that you could really see a lot of detail in there anyways. You can see just those intake trunks are pretty tight, but I don't know. You still can see in there if you look right. So that's kind of unfortunate that they don't have that detail. But again, that's something I can live with, mainly just because the average person is not going to be looking down the intake trunks with like a pen light, for example. But just know that there is no detail there. The actual construction goes together pretty well. Academy's newer 72nd scale kits really are really well engineered. They fit well. There was only 2 places on the side of the fuselage up by the front intakes where I really had to use any filler, and even then I just used some of the Vallejo plastic putty that once you put it on, let it dry, and then you can slowly wipe it off with like a damp cotton bud and blend it, and that was all it took. So here you can see I've installed the covers over the weapon bays and the landing gear doors. Those are all the in-flight pieces that you can use. They're optional pieces, but they fit flawlessly. So I just a little bit of white glue to tack them on, and they were good for the whole painting process. So just know that if you ever want to build this one in flight, it's really easy. The kit does come with a really nice pilot figure with the modern helmets that the F-35 pilots use. So definitely, like I said, good bang for your buck if you want to do an in-flight build. They make it really easy. So at this point, I've tacked on the canopy with some white PVA glue. Like I mentioned earlier, I will be doing this with the canopy open, but I like to use the canopy to mask the cockpit. So the white PVA glue helps it stay on, but is easily removable. At this point, I'm just kind of prepping the weapons for painting. If you've built any of Academy's recent, like their Super Hornet kit, it uses basically a lot of the same weapon sprues. So if you're familiar with modern Academy modern aircraft kits, these weapons will be familiar to you. So it comes with a pair of JDAMs, a pair of Sidewinders, a pair of AMRAMs, and then the 500-pound bombs. So you can do a full loadout, which is what I had ultimately planned on doing. So here I'm using liquid mask to finish masking off the canopy. I used the tape just to kind of define the outline. I find this process much better, and it doesn't necessarily guarantee, but in my opinion, it gives you much better results in terms of avoiding, overspray or paint getting underneath 2 layers of masking tape or whatever. I like it better. So painting the outside of the exhaust nozzle with some burnt iron from Alclad and a good dark, iron color. The F-35 has quite a few, at least in this version, I believe this was, the decal sheet said this was circa 2012, I believe. So there's actually quite a few different gray colors on the F-35. So what I'm doing here is picking out certain panels in this Vallejo gray. I will then mask over those panels, paint the main body of the jet, and then do the decals on top. So there'll be 3 different layers of gray on there. So painting up the ordnance, pretty standard. The actual weapons themselves are well detailed. Unfortunately, they didn't come with really any decals to really make them pop. So maybe aftermarket decals would be in order. So now I'm painting the main aircraft, and I decided to use to try out Mission Models Have Glass Gray, and I'm kind of mixed on this. I do like that manufacturers are actually trying to do, or trying to replicate that Have Glass paint. Ultimately, though, I think this one just comes up a little too short. The metallic pigment in it was too large, and it gives it a really grainy look, and I felt like it was too dark for, at least for what I've seen of F-35s. But I was kind of committed at this point. I really just wanted to kind of give it a go, see how it would turn out. So we gave it a gloss coat, and now we can move on to decals. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of decals on this when you're doing all of the RAM material. I didn't film it all, mainly just because this probably took me about 4 hours over a couple of nights to get all the decals on, all the RAM material, plus all the actual aircraft markings. So I just filmed a few parts of it here so you can kind of get an idea of how it worked. Overall, the decal quality was pretty high. They were thin. They reacted well to my Solvaset, and in and of themselves, they were good decals. One of the issues was the decals didn't always line up with the raised detail on the kit. So there was a few areas where I had to, try and trim the decals to make them fit. And then there was a couple areas, kind of especially on the bottom, where I just kind of fudged it and let it slide. And I wasn't going to be, overly picky about how precisely they matched up. One thing when you're doing a kit with a lot of decals, though, is to keep track of the ones that you've already done. So here I'm just laying down my Solvaset to get that all to conform and sit down and really settle into the details. For the most part, it worked out great. I ended up having a few areas that silvered on me, but I think that was just because I wasn't rolling out the air bubbles as well as I should have been on some of those larger decals. So some of the RAM sections would be provided as a large decal with a lot of carrier film in between. So that, I think that's on me, not necessarily the decal. So I did give another gloss coat over the decals once they were all nestled and cured, just to give it a good uniform look. And at this point, you can see in the background, I've removed the canopy, and I wanted to try and go for that tinted canopy look. And I've seen different ways of doing this. This is one that I wanted to try. So I'm actually using All-Clad's Aqua Gloss with a little bit of yellow ink in there, and just spraying really, really light coats on the inside, letting it dry in between each coat. And even although it's not necessarily super accurate in terms of the actual color of the real canopy, I was quite pleased with how it turned out. The Aqua Gloss laid down really smooth. I didn't see any distortion or like a haziness to it. It seemed, the clarity seemed really nice, and I was kind of quite happy with how it turned out. So at this point, we can just kind of start putting on all the little details here, and just like I mentioned before, everything fit really well. I didn't really run into any issues with misalignments or bad fitting parts, and everything had good solid contacts. The only points that weren't necessarily super solid, and you can kind of see it here, is getting these large JDAMs to fit inside the weapons bays. There was not a good connection point there. The missiles were great. The bombs on the wings were great. Just those large JDAMs, they didn't fit in there very well. One of the cool things about the F-35 is those AMRAAM missiles are actually on smaller, like, little swing arms. So when the weapon bay doors open, the missile actually moves out into the slipstream and before firing. But it also needs to do that in order to make room for the JDAM to be released as well. So just kind of a neat little fact that I didn't know prior to working on this. But I think models like this look really cool and good when you can see all the exposed weapon bays. When just last month when we were at the air show and they were doing the F-35 demo, they did a slow pass across the crowd with all the weapon bays open, and it was just really neat to see that in person and to witness that, because these really are spectacular jets, and also they're really loud. And I know that might seem kind of obvious because it's a jet fighter with a giant jet engine, but compared to all the other jets that were flying that day, I think the F-35s were the loudest. So maybe you've had different experiences, but that's been my experience now. So another fun little thing I wanted to try out was adding some remove before flight tags. So I picked these up online. They're actually like those double printed decals, so it's printed on both sides. And I was actually quite happy with how these worked out. You just use a little bit of super glue to attach them, and then you can kind of manipulate them and bend them and fold them, and I really liked them. So here's the finished product, and I would recommend this kit. Just know that There are a few areas where the detail is kind of boring. There's no first stage compressor detail, and the decals don't always quite line up to the surface detail. But if you wanted to do a more, more current F-35, you'd pretty much just not use the decals at all for the RAM material. They've just kind of gone to an all single color at this point. But anyways, if you stuck around, I appreciate it. And look out for more videos. I'm back in the video editing business, and I'll try to keep a constant release schedule going. So like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.